So there's two-pronged. There's what we're doing as consumers, but and I suspect a lot of us here are thinking about how we can help enable businesses to become more productive and better customer services and innovate and faster and things like that. So as I kind of touched upon before when I said that I've been around Microsoft for quite some amount of time, I feel that we're at an inflection point where we've been at a number of points throughout kind of human history. I would almost go back as far as what we saw with the printing press, Industrial Revolution, things like the microprocessor, how that revolutionized our lives, the internet, of course, mobile technology, and here we are really into this next wave of innovation. So that's very much where we see where AI and advanced AI models are really becoming the new compute platform. And I think that's a way to kind of get to the thinking around that. Okay. Sorry for the notes. I actually had my notes on my screen, but now I'm kind of showing out my screen in a different way. Alrighty, so just as a bit of a potted history around AI. Now, I'm assuming that a lot of you folk have been playing around the AI world for a fair amount of time, but for folk who kind of maybe from more of a business background, maybe not so much. But the main thing I want to point out is ChatGPT didn't just appear overnight. It's been over decades of research and breakthroughs. So really going back to the 50s where folk were trying to build and that kind of dream of being able to build a system which mimicked human intelligence. And again, if you think about what the compute capabilities were back then, that was pretty limited. But it really did spur on the first kind of early systems of expert systems, which tried to mimic human decision making. So that's kind of where we were in the 50s, so very early starting. Then we kind of got on to machine learning, and I suspect the more technical folk here are much more involved, and they've kind of been much more involved in the machine learning. And if you think about machine learning, you had a data set, and really what you're trying to do is kind of build an algorithm which approximated this data out there. So it would learn from the data, and then you better use that algorithm to go and make predictions. The obvious example everyone talks about is things like house prices. You've got a house in a certain postcode, it's got a certain number of bedrooms, number of loos, number of car parks, and we know historically that fetched that price. Then we go and use that algorithm to go and predict future house prices. That's the kind of thing what we did a lot with machine learning. Okay, so then we've got on to kind of deep learning. And again, folk who've been more technical involved in these. If you think about deep learning as being able to generate mathematical models which in many respects kind of mimic the structure and function of the human brain. And that was really what those are, and the huge advances there if you think about like recognition, voice recognition, and stuff like those that we got to. And then we're up to where we are now. So if you think about that, that's over kind of like 70 years of a serious amount of research, a lot of hardware, software developments in that period of time to get to where we are with generative AI. And the huge steps forwards are really in both semantic understanding of what we're saying, and if you're not familiar with what I mean by semantic understanding, it's kind of understanding the intent. And the example I like to use, previously, if you think back maybe a few generations, when we looked at search or connecting with systems, it was tend to be keyword based. And the lovely example I like to use is someone might type into a search engine, my dream wedding dress might be an example. And if you just took the keyword, well, you might think, well, this person's dreaming about a wedding dress. Well, they could quite possibly have been dreaming about a wedding dress, but probably what they meant is their ideal wedding dress. So it's understanding what the intent is of that query, and that's where a lot of the research has gone into. And that's where we get to with generative AI, where it understands the semantic meaning of a query or a prompt we like to talk about, and then it can respond back to us in human-like natural language. Now, I did use the word human-like, and I really want to emphasize, particularly for folk who may be relatively new to this, is really emphasize that these are statistical models that are making predictions. They are not human. They are making predictions about what is going to be, what is the next likely word in a sentence, and that's kind of how they work. But really do want to get over the point that these systems, though they may appear incredibly clever, by no means human. They are models and mathematical models. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is what's going on with OpenAI and Microsoft. So there are two kind of distinct groups, and you're probably familiar with OpenAI, and I suspect that's probably why you're here today. But you may not necessarily be aware of the Microsoft relationship with OpenAI. So effectively what Microsoft and OpenAI as an organization are doing, we are collaborating on the development of advanced AI systems. So that's where it is. And what Microsoft is doing in this is that we're building out supercomputer infrastructure to enable those models to be able to be developed as well as to be executed. So that's kind of what it is. So there is a relationship, it's a collaborative relationship in which we are working with that organization, providing the infrastructure to build those models. And then what we're doing is we're taking those models and then we're deploying them into Azure. More importantly, more to the point actually, you have the ability to be able to take those models and deploy them into your Azure subscription. So imagine you're a bank and you might say, look, I want to go and run this GPT model and I want to go and enable this model. Then I would go into my Azure subscription and say, I want the Text DaVinci 003 model and I want to be able to use that inside my business. Then I would basically create an instance of that model inside my organization, and then I would do things, I'd work with that model. And all that data and all the prompts, all those things remain within the context of my subscription. So that's pretty much what's going on. And we are working with OpenAI, and there are essentially 4 families of models which you can deploy into Azure. So there's GPT-3, which is kind of text prompt-based. There's ChatGPT and previews of GPT-4, and they are more conversational based, and I'm going to show a demo of this. How many people here know what a prompt is? Okay, a fair number of you, great. Completions? Chat completions? Okay, cool. Right. I'm going to show you a demo. So we've got this whole world of conversational, which we typically refer to as chat completions. We've got Codex, which is generative AI for code. So if you're familiar and if you're a developer, you would have seen things like Copilot, GitHub Copilot for Visual Studio Code, where it can kind of almost second guess what you're developing and help you. And then the 4th model is this thing called DALL-E. And DALL-E is a generative image. And again, I'm going to show you. Again, how many folk have played around with Bing and used Bing image? Okay, cool. How many people have never used Bing before out of that crowd? It's kind of interesting. I have to confess, I have not been, I've tended to probably use Google, but I have tended to swing back to Bing. And it's actually been a really pleasant experience. Why? Because of the generative AI that's been built into it. So you can go and do the whole AI-based queries, and you get back fascinating information. As well as, if you play around with it, you can also do generative images. So you can say, hey, look, go and create me an image based on blah. And I'm going to show you that. But that's it's interesting to see that there's been more traction around Bing. And I have actually got used to it. Amazing. Alrighty, okay, so as I mentioned, OpenAI and Microsoft are 2 distinct organizations. We're collaborating around advanced AI models. And we have Azure OpenAI services. You can deploy models into your tenant, into your subscription, and you can also tune these models. You might take a general model and you say, hey, look, I'm building out a system for medical, or I'm building out a system for legal, and I need to tune it for specific scenarios. So kind of re-emphasizing just what I said before, we've kind of got the models I mentioned before. So we've got these prompt, we've got this conversational, we've got chat conversational prompting. And so you've got GPT 3.5, GPT-4, and ChatGPT. Codex, which I've mentioned, which is around specialized models for building out coding. And we've got generative image models. Okay, so I've already mentioned prompts, and I think pretty much everybody put up their hand around prompts. And these are the fundamental things that we're in a situation where we are now connecting and communicating with an AI model in natural language as a prompt, and it will respond back with a continuation. So if we look over on the left-hand side, we've kind of got the simplest prompt from something like GPT-3. So where you can say, hey, look, you can put in a sentence, and it will come back with the next most likely, statistically likely model of what those next words will look like. So that's one here. So it said, write a tagline for an ice cream shop, and the most likely response came back was, we serve up smiles. The other thing about it, you will almost certainly have noticed that you go and put the same prompt in, and you get a slightly different answer. And again, because it's a statistical model, it's using sampling across the most likely candidates of words that are going to be coming back through as candidates to go and to communicate back. Okay, so that's the basic prompts. We've got these kind of more chat-oriented, so more the kind of chat GPT, where you can start kind of having more of a conversation. Hey, look, I'm having trouble setting up my Xbox. The response, hey, the response could be back, there are a few things you can try to troubleshoot. And the response, hey, look, fantastic. Wouldn't life be so easy if it was this easy? Thanks, that worked. Do you have any games recommended for a 14-year-old? And you can go on. But you can kind of get the idea, and this is what's captured the attention of organizations, because they can now start potentially communicating. They might have chatbots sitting on websites that are pretty basic. You can now start taking that whole concept of these kind of conversational chat and then really extend out that and make it a much more, a much better experience for customers. Codex is the example there. You can see this is, and I appreciate most of you aren't developers, but this one here is just creating a query inside a SQL Server, which is a database. And you get back responses. And the DALL-E one over here on the right-hand side is, hey, look, describe what you want to play around with, what you want to see. And then the DALL-E model will come back with an image based on your description. It's really, really awesome. Okay, now, I'm not going to spend too much time dwelling on this, but just this is the reason I put on this slide here is this is what enterprise customers are using. And it's kind of useful for you to understand, particularly if you're a startup or something like that, and you're looking to sell into enterprise or into customers, about what are they using? Because you typically need to be able to play into what they're using, and that's kind of fundamentally what's going on here. So I suspect a lot of you are using Office today, and enterprise is obviously using Office out there, and what we're doing around things like OpenAI is we are enhancing Office. So you'll see that if you look around there, you'll find various announcements around what's going with Office. Using OpenAI and using prompts to say, hey, let's kickstart this email, or let's kickstart this proposal I've got to write to this customer, whatever it might be. But you're going to find a lot of these advanced AI models starting to play out into Office. Dynamics, if you're not familiar, it's really around business systems. And again, we're seeing that. It could be things around sentiment analysis, understanding customer issues and things like that. And obviously, there are a whole lot of partner solutions, which you guys might play into. If you're not familiar around application platforms, customers tend to be using things like Power BI. What Microsoft is doing is that we're introducing these advanced AI models, these ChatGPT-like models and GPT-4 into the application platforms that our customers are using, because their customers want to be much more productive. To kind of give you an example, how many folk here have been into Excel and you know you need to go and make a pivot? You need to make a pivot of a whole set of data, and you need to go and create a pivot chart. How many folk have done that? And every time you go into it, you're kind of like, how the heck do I do that pivot chart again? And where we're going to be, and I think I saw a great demo, which is like, create a pivot, you can type in, create me a pivot chart of this data in this range, bang, it'll go off and do it. It'll create the commands to go and drive Excel to do it. So those are the kinds of things where we fundamentally know what we want to do, but we don't do it that often, and those are kind of where things like models are going to be able to help us. We also have a range of services out there around bot services, cognitive search, video indexing, great for things like call centers. So call centers typically want to be able to record conversations. Then they want to be able to figure out what was said in those conversations, extract the text off those, and then they're going to be passing those models through search, through advanced AI to be able to query, figure out, summarize what's going on in those conversations. Next thing I want to talk about is what we call cognitive services. Now, OpenAI lives in the world of this layer called cognitive services. And to kind of give you a bit of a sense of what cognitive services exist, is we've got things like vision. So being able to figure out what an object is. Vision might be things like understanding what's on a form and being able to extract information off a form. Really popular scenario. You might think that the world is all gone web, but customers are still grappling with lots of paperwork. And they want to be able to automate that, grab the information off those forms, and then be able to do something interesting with it. Same with speech, text to speech, speech to text, language, decision support, and really what the new kid in the block is OpenAI. Azure OpenAI service, I should be more specific. And what we're seeing customers, they're joining up these scenarios. They're taking like the call center example I mentioned before, grabbing the text, grabbing the speech, converting it to text, putting it into search, using that search to go and augment a prompt for when they're doing things like prompt generation. And the very bottom layer down here, we're kind of at the fundamental layer, which is really around Azure machine learning. So, hey, look, you're a data scientist or machine learning engineer, and you've got data sets, you want to be able to work with those and generate models to go and match those into those data sets. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is what is going on around responsible AI. Now, I'm sure that we've all been around long enough and read around the web and again, over a period of time, we've all seen examples where industries or organizations are using AI to try and be more productive. An example, I'm going to pick on Microsoft examples. It's an easy one. There was a model which came out, I think it was in 2016, called Microsoft Tay. Had anyone heard of Microsoft Tay? A few people had. Few people. So it was an experimental AI model, and it didn't take long for people to get onto that model and start to get it spewing out hate speech. So things like that, or encouraging people to take their own lives, or things like that. So the whole of scenarios where, and eventually I think it was up for about a week, and then I think it got taken down. Other examples where, and I'm going to pick on police enforcement, particularly in the US. Now again, you might have seen examples where enforcement agencies have taken data sets, and I'm going to look at crime statistics to try and figure out where the hotspots are for crime and maybe where the next hotspot would be. Now, of course, those data sets almost certainly had a bias in them. And those data sets, human biases, were often biased towards African American population in the US. And then you had a situation, of course, you're taking those biased data sets and then going and building a model on there, and you're effectively reinforcing those human bias. And that's what we're trying to guard against. So we have this initiative called Responsible AI. And it's an initiative that's been around for about 5 years, really to kind of address. So we obviously had our own issues with things like Tay, but we also saw our customers having these issues where these models had biases in them, and then they were just reinforcing these biases in there. So there are basically 6 principles around responsible AI. So we've got things like the data that goes into these models should be private, it should be inclusive across the whole section of society, not singling out a particular section of a population. It should be accountable. You should be able to figure out how this data set impacted on the decision by these models. Transparency, understanding where it should be fair, kind of responsible and safe. Again, kind of getting down to things like making sure that the data is being used, it's reliable, reproducible, etc. So that's what's driving this. And you'll see this conversation coming from Microsoft all the time around responsible AI. In fact, we have tooling to make this much easier for organizations to work with. So for example, on the Azure OpenAI service, there is a responsible AI layer in there. It's called a content filter. And basically, you can be talking into that service, and again, super applicable for enterprises. Enterprises do not want folk to be building out solutions and then suddenly having hate speech being spewed into their organization. So we look at content filtering. There are models there to look at what the content, what the prompts are going into Azure OpenAI service, making sure they're appropriate. And if they aren't appropriate, then you'll get back a response back to your application. But also making sure that the response back from the model is appropriate. And there are some guidelines in there for things like that. But that's what we're doing. We want to make sure that that enterprise customers and consumers, for that matter, in terms of Bing, are not having a bad experience. And no doubt you all saw when Bing first came out with AI enhanced search, of course, people pushed it and pushed it and pushed it to see what they could do. We knew that would happen, and we did a lot of work to make sure, and we've done more work to mitigate against that. But fundamentally, what we've got these six principles of AI. In fact, if you check out that link at the bottom, you'll see a great document, an article there about why Microsoft's got on board with this whole focus around responsible AI. And we view it as an industry initiative, by the way. We want organizations to think about data when they're building out systems. And then on top of that, we've kind of got these building blocks to enable all this, enable these principles. So we've got governance, rules, tracking, training, policy. So you'll find there's a host of information. If you go searching for Microsoft Responsible AI, you'll find there's cheat sheets, there's documentation, things that you need to be considering when you're going building out models and deploying systems. And we provide tools and processes. So if you're building out models inside Azure, the machine learning service, we implement tools like a responsible AI dashboard, which will help you through this process of ensuring that you're going to build models which are representative. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is, so I've talked about responsible AI, and the next thing I want to talk about is really around kind of trust. Because everybody worries about their data, how that data is being used. Doesn't matter from, you read it across the press, no doubt you've thought about it as well. So the thing that I most want to emphasize here is when you're using Azure OpenAI service, you'll create an instance of a model in your tenant or your subscription, and anything you do with that interaction with that model, that data, for one, is held in encrypted storage, but secondly, it's your data. We do not use your data to go and train models. So you might, for example, come along and tune a model. You might say, look, I want to go and tune it for medical, and you've kind of come up with some prompts and responses, and you go and push those in to go and tune those models. We do not look at that data. We do not take that data to go and use it to go and enhance those models. So really the emphasis is it's your data, it's your models. You can go and fine tune them, and it's yours. And obviously, organizations care about compliance and enterprise and security controls and things like that. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is not all things are OpenAI. That said, today we're at a GPT hack, and I'm kind of assuming that pretty much everything is going to be OpenAI. So these are kind of things like I need a general purpose model that helps multiple tasks. Well, that could be a good candidate. I need to generate human-like text. I need rapid prototyping. I could use a model with little no training. Those are all great candidates. And so those will all be great candidates for OpenAI, but it's not the only game in town. And I can't emphasize more that organizations, they have lots of complex needs. I've already touched upon the call center, but forms, they've got a whole different sets of data sets that are coming through, and they need to be able to convert that into a format which is searchable, which can then be used for prompts and enhancing prompts and things like that. So you'll tend to see it's a range of AI that build up an overall solution. Okay, so I've kind of got some use cases. So these are kind of the top use cases, but not limited. So content generation would be the obvious one. So we've got call center analytics. So we want to be able to figure out what was the overall sentiment from a call, what were the key points, what were customers' concerns. So you can use those types of things. You might have like an online site with a bot, and you want to be able to generate a great customer experience and have prompts and narrow the domain down of the data. So a great example would be insurance sector, where you might want to find out, does my insurance policy, how many people, does my insurance policy cover this type of dentistry. I'm sure we've all done that on our health insurance policies. And we try to find out that. So if you're an enterprise, maybe you're an insurance company, you could start creating a bot which now understands a domain. So it's got information that's been trained about insurance policies that this company offers, and then that information can be used to augment the responses back to customers. So you can really create very rich, domain-specific responses back into a customer, back to your customers. Summation, I've kind of mentioned, so call center analytics, kind of touched upon that. Code generation, if you're a developer, it's almost magical sometimes. I have been a developer for a long time, and I realized I'm actually probably a very average developer, because it seems when I want to code something, the model already understands what I want to do, and which I find fascinating. It just saves a fantastic amount of time if you're a developer and you're using these models. Semantic search, I kind of talked about before. These kind of things to be able to understand the intent of what the question is, and then to be able to formulate a response back to that. Okay, we'll talk through that. Okay, so this is a bit of a scenario. So I've kind of touched on this already. But you think about, as much as we'd love to get away from paper still rules. In fact, if you do lots of presentations, I always keep a paper copy with me. But obviously, through COVID, in fact, I built a workshop based on COVID, unfortunately. We all ended up filling in paper forms. We all went to the pharmacy and filled out a paper form, and we wondered why we're doing this online, but of course we had to respond pretty quickly, created a massive amount of paperwork, and we filled in forms. And all those forms got sent off to the health department, and of course there's some processing. So tons of examples in our day-to-day life. So we've got a document library. These documents have been scanned in. We've got something called Form Recognizer, which you can go and describe the layout of the form, and you can pick out data from those forms. And then we grab each section or the data, whatever it might look like. And then we can, in this case here, we go and put it into something called cognitive search. And cognitive search is smart enough to understand intent. So you can put all this content into there. You can effectively index these documents, but also have intent-based searching in this. You've got a search index. You've got the end user come along and say, I want to make a query and to find out, I don't know, what part of the population got their COVID jab in April. It could be something as simple as that. And then you go into that search index. The search index would then go and grab that data, grab relevant data from the search index, augment the prompt that was put in by the end user, how many people got their jabs in April, and then come back with the prompt, augment that prompt, and then respond back to the end user. So that's the kind of round trip that we see with these types of scenarios. I've already mentioned the call center one. This example here, conversation's been recorded, they get stored, they get converted to text, then we use OpenAI to go and do summation, and then we can go into Power BI and go and look at the conversation trends and things like that.
Jay,
Yo.
are either of those examples on a GitHub repo anywhere?
Yes, actually. I will dig those up. There are some lovely examples. I will dig those up, but yes, there are some good examples there with this pattern has been implemented. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick comparison of models. I'm going to jump through these here. So the general view, if you're building out, then use ChatGPT as your kind of default. Get something working, and it's also one of the cheapest models, and then you may be able to downgrade to an even cheaper model if you want. But ChatGPT is generally what we recommend for people to start with. It's more broadly available as well. If you're based in Western Europe, which obviously we're not, then the GPT 3.5 models are based in those countries. At the moment, to be clear, the models are based in US-centric, in the US and across Western Europe. Now, obviously, you can expect over time those models to be made more broadly available to more data centers across the world. And that is important, obviously, for some organizations, government organizations, do not want their data going offshore. And things like GPT-4 will improve those prompts. Okay, so where are we going? Okay, so customizing Azure OpenAI. So we've got your prompts, we've got your data. So I've talked about lots of ways in which you can get data from forms, from call centers, a whole range of things like that, augmenting that, and then running it past the model, and then getting the model to respond back. Okay, so I'm just going to go into a bit of stuff that I think probably most of you already know. So I'm just going to talk about key terms. So we've got an email, and we want to be able to extract information from this email. So we've got the prompt. So the email itself is the prompt, and we've got some context here. So we want to extract the email address from this email, and we've kind of got the completion. So we've got the context, we've got the prompt, and we've got the completion. In this case here, the address, just Microsoft in the US. Tokens. Next thing I want to talk about is tokens. Now you'll hear this discussion about tokens. The first time people started talking about tokens, I started thinking, what the heck is a token? It's pretty straightforward. It's just a word, or typically a part of a word. And it's a way in which models can be more efficient with processing sentences. Whoops. So a token would just be like I thought. In fact, thought would probably be broken down into multiple tokens. Platform, again, would be broken down to multiple tokens. Almost think of it like a syllable. It's not a syllable, but it's a certain size sentence. There is a formula for it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is a little demo, just to kind of show you some of how these things work. Now, given that most folk here have played around with this, I'm going to show two types of demos. I'm going to do what's called a completions demo and a chat completion demo. Now, I apologize. A couple of these will appeal much more to the technical folk, and some of the business folk will think, what on earth is he talking about? But I'll try and emphasize why I'm showing these demos. Okay, so the first demo I'm going to go and show is the old happy birthday. So what I've got here is I've loaded up something called Azure OpenAI Playground. So the Playground is a place in which you can start experimenting with prompts and chat completions. And you can see that I can select models. So inside my subscription, I have a number of models that I've loaded up, and I'm going to use the DaVinci Model 3, and I'm just going to post in here. And statistically, the most likely thing to come back from that would be, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's kind of that's the most likely thing that we're going to hear back from this model, which is fine. So, but let's say we didn't really quite mean that. Let's say we meant, and what we're going to do now is we're going to set a bit more context and say, happy birthday to you, and here's a great handbag gift idea. So now what we're doing is we're adding more context into that prompt. And I'm sure that, again, if you've been playing around with this, you, like me, have watched more YouTube videos than you care to admit about prompt engineering. It's become the next coolest thing. So in this example here, instead of getting back happy birthday to you, I'm now getting back the handbag is the perfect gift, is perfect for occasion, makes the great handbag gift. So you can now see that very simply what I've done is I've added more context, and I'm getting a different response back from the model. In this case here, it's a detachable RAM, blah, blah. You can read as much as I. Hopefully you get the general idea. Okay, now the next thing, which is really fascinating, and this is where the power of these models kind of come in, is you can say, I want you to act as something. In this case, and if you think about it, in real life, if you wanted legal advice or medical advice or whatever, or marketing advice, you would typically go to find a doctor, or you go and find a lawyer. You'd go and find somebody who has experience or has a context of medical information. And this is effectively what you're doing. You're telling the model, so I want you to kind of behave a bit like a marketing assistant. So we'll come back over here to the Playground. And I'm going to say, act as a marketing assistant and write a marketing plan and a fun tweet for happy birthday to you, and here's a great handbag gift idea. And of course, the idea is you're a startup and you've got these fantastic handbags, but you have no marketing background, and this will kind of come back and give you a bit of a strategy. So that's fairly standard kind of strategy. But again, if you're a startup, you may have no idea where to start with these things. And you can see it's come up here with a fun tweet. What the fun tweet is says, happy birthday to you, make this special day even more special with a stylish handbag. So you can kind of see where we're getting to. So we're setting context, but we're now telling it, I want you to kind of behave a bit like you're a marketing system. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. The next one is, I'm sorry, this is going to get a little bit more technical for folk who aren't developers, but you may kind of recognize this. What I'm going to set is I'm going to use what are called chat completions. And I'm going to set what's called a system message. So in the playground, I'm going to come across a chat, and I'm going to set what's called a system message. And we just save that away. So the system message that I set, so I did jump around quite quickly, is I'm going to say you're an assistant designed to extract entities. Now, if you're not a developer, you might think, what the heck is an entity? Entity in this case is name, company, phone number. Just think about it like that. And users will paste in a string of text, and you'll respond with an entity extracting text as a JSON. Now, again, if you're not a developer, you will think, what on earth is all this about? And then the prompt I'm going to put in is, hello, my name is Robert Smith. I'm calling from Contoso Insurance, and I'm interested in learning about, this is my phone number. So what I'm going to do is going to paste into the prompt, and you'll see it's come back, it's processed that prompt, and it's now brought me back a JSON string. And again, it's brought back me the entity about this. Now, super useful if you're a developer and you want to be able to extract information into a more structured format and get that and pass that through your system. Now, so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to have a bit of fun and games. I'll see if I can. Well, hey, look, I practiced this last night. I hope I can get it back again. Now, what you're seeing in here is what's going on with messages. Now, again, more of a developer focus, but it's really important to remember, though these models, when you're chatting to one of these models, you might think, heck, how does this model over here understand or remember what I was talking about? That might be kind of curious. I've typed in this, and then I've said, no, I want it to look a bit more like this, and you're having a conversation. And you think, wow, how does this model remember what's going on? Well, it doesn't. What you're doing is that you're replaying that conversation back. So as the chat develops, you are then taking that chat, that conversation, and then replaying it back to the OpenAI model, and it's coming back and says, oh, okay, this was the previous chat. I understand where we got to. This is the additional question. I'm going to respond back like that. Super important to remember, these models do not remember state. They do not remember the conversation. The other thing that you can do is you can click on View Code. So the playground, what it will do is it will give you sample code as to how to go and implement this conversation inside your application. So again, if you're Python developers, there's JSON, there's C#, or you can even go and use curl if you're more technical folk. But you will get code examples back here in C#, etc. Well, hey, look, I didn't remember. Okay, so super important to remember, models are stateless. You are having to replay chats back to these things, and you can go into these playgrounds, and you can see, you get great examples here of how these things hang together. I forgot to show that in the previous example here. You can go and look at and get the code samples for this. Okay, the next one I'm going to show is an example that I first saw, and I unashamedly stole this demo from a YouTuber on the internet, and some of you may have seen this. And I remember watching this demo thinking, huh? How does this demo work? And it really got me scratching my head thinking about, I really don't get it. So in this case here, what I'm asking the ChatGPT model is I want it to behave like a SQL server. Now, I appreciate that folk with more of a business bent will think, what the heck is a SQL server? SQL servers are database systems. They keep records, customer records, all those types of things. They are held on there. So it's a technology which is used to store information about what's happening inside a business. So a bit like I said before, act as a marketing assistant, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the model to imagine that you are now a Microsoft SQL server. And this is the demo, so I've told it that, and we'll just clear out the chat. Has anyone seen this demo before? Someone down here. So I'm glad I fessed up to that I did nick the demo. And I remember this is one of the first demos that came out. And apologies, this may be a little bit on the small side. But what I've put in here, as I said, you're going to execute a command about who am I. And it's going to respond back your domain user, which is, and remember, this is not a database server. It has been trained on a whole corpus of documentation, including SQL Server documentation, manuals, discussions about this. So that's how this is working. What I'm going to say is I'm going to say exec SB databases. And we're going to put in that. And remember, there's replaying this chat. And it's coming back here. And I should get back. Okay, look at that. Because it's non-determinative, we're going to run that command again and see what happens. Okay, it's decided it's not going to play quite like I wanted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database. And the response back, the model would be back, it would respond back completely successfully. Now what I'm going to say is I'm going to use this customer database. And the most likely response back from this model would be the database context has changed to customer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database table. Come in here. And the command's completed successfully. Remember, this is not a database server. It's behaving like one, though. And then I'm going to say select from users. And there will be no data in there. It's an empty data set. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a user. So again, if you're a database person, you would have understood this. I'm going to do an insert into that database. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to say select star users. Paste that in, and with a fair wind, you'll see you get back what you would expect to get back from a database server. Let's go and paste in Dave. Dave has not been 30 for a while, but we'll paste that in. And we'll come over here and I will go and do things like, come over here, select from users where name equals Dave. Run that query and voila, it brings back just Dave, that row. So I want to emphasize this is not a database server. This is bringing back the most likely prediction based on the training corpus that is seen when the model was trained out. But what I want to get across to these demos is context matters, and particularly telling it who you want it to behave as or what you want it to behave as. So as I said, I saw that demo the first time. I remember thinking, I am completely confused. What is going on here? Okay, not the first time in my life. Right. Go through that. Okay, so the next thing I want to show is DALL-E, and I'm just going to go into DALL-E. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, how many folk here have played around with DALL-E? Okay, a reasonable number of you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into our favorite search engine. And we're going to go into it's funny, it's not quite where I was expecting it to go to. Okay, what I did is I clicked on chat. So what it's going to do is I've tried it, and I actually used this. I've been out for dinner at a friend's place, and I said, create a superhero cook in the style of pop art. And what the model will go off and do is create these. Now, I just ran a campaign. It was a kind of a content campaign, and I used it. I'm going to show you how I used it. So while it's off generating, we'll come over here to assets, and I created a whole lot of superheroes. And I had basically daily posts, and I wanted to kind of mix it up. I cannot draw to save myself, but I can type in text, and I said, create me an AI superhero. And you can see what I did. I wanted diversity, so different ages, different skin colors, different identities, all those types of things. But you can do that within these models. You can kind of nudge them to do what you want. And you'll see that's kind of come back. And if I go and click on these, and you can get some, I don't know, this one here, he looks like a superhero cook. And you can see these are kind of things you can have a lot of fun with. So I've been using it, go for dinner, I always like, thank you very much for having us text back to these friends. And nowadays what I do is I include a little superhero cook or something like those. Just something to kind of mix it up a bit. Super easy to do, doesn't cost anything. And you can have a lot of fun. But also, you can obviously use these in your applications. I've created some funsy things around here, around superheroes, but as much as your imagination can take you.